Hey everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and you guys are definitely going to get your money's worth out of this show. I have done a ridiculously huge amount of prep for this on the Zaitsev, and well, that's just the nature of the Zaitsev. It's an incredibly complicated variation. The theory is extremely deep, and I'd like to think that I am extending the theory in some variations here. So let's jump in. This is episode 33 in our series on the quick Ruy Lopez. It's the penultimate episode. Next time we've got the Briar, and then it's finished. So, and my Briar prep, I think, will be more brief than this one. All right, well, let's just dive in. I may have to break this up into two videos because there's so much. We'll see. All right, so let's go. So this is, of course, the starting position right here of the Zaitsev. And the Zaitsev, in particular, the idea is with d4, rook e8, to not fear white playing knight to g5, either here or at some point in the near future. So, you know, before Zaitsev, well, through Karpov, showed what a fantastic weapon this was, it was thought that if black wanted to go for a setup like this, he would need to play h6 first, either on move 9 or on move 10. But Karpov, in particular, really proved that this was, in fact, just a completely playable system for black. And, sorry, Karpov proved this was a completely playable system for black, and it's become one of the major lines against the Ruy. So before we get to that, let's very quickly discuss d3 here. And I'll note that black can go Briar, so to speak, with knight to b8, but generally prefers to go forward in the Chigorin style. So knight a5, bishop c2, c5. And in fact, we discussed this position a little bit in the Chigorin video. I'll recap that line, but add a little bit more. I think I've improved for black there. So knight b to d2, rook e8, knight f1. And here I think, instead of bishop to f8, which I mentioned in the previous video, the one on the Chigorin, black should play h6. And I think this should be sufficient for equality. Although, of course, you still have to play. I mean, it's very early still, and white and black can both choose between different plans. But this would be my recommendation here. So there I gave bishop f8, and I think white correctly plays bishop to g5. So h6, bishop h4, and there I gave, I think, g6. And I don't remember exactly where I left off. Oh, no, I did give this full line. So knight e3, bishop g7, queen d2, knight c6. And here, while white would like to play bishop to b3, take on f6, exchange the light square bishops, and then put a knight on d5, and so on, if bishop to b3, black can just chase it back. But I think if white then plays a4, or instead of the repetition just plays a4, I think white stands slightly better. So my second suggested improvement for black is here, and I would say to play g5. We looked at a variation like this elsewhere in that Chigorin video. So bishop g3, c4, but maybe white still has an edge with a4. So really, again, my bigger recommendation would be, at this point, to play h6, not permitting bishop to g5, and then getting on with whatever you want, knight c6, bishop f8, etc. So d3 is not a terrible approach, but we'll stick with d4, which is, I think, much more fighting, to the point, and just a lot of fun. All right, rook e8. And now here, of course, knight to g5 can be played. Black plays rook f8. And, all right, if white plays knight f3, black has to answer the question whether he wants to play this position out or not, or if he's willing to take the draw. You know, you play h6, you're in a Smyslov. And also you could play, well, no, I'm not sure what else you could play here. Maybe you could play queen d7 also. That's not as popular, but yeah, really h6. Or knight to a5. I mean, I think that can be played too. Anyway, white doesn't usually do that, but if you're a higher rated player, you have to keep that in mind. Anyway, f4 is the alternative, the attempt to exploit knight to g5 in a favorable direction, rather than just needling black over a draw. So here, h6 is playable, and this is, in fact, well, this is actually what black should do if he wants to keep the game going. Now that may seem strange. You know, how can we talk about a draw here? But chess is a game where lots of tactics tend to produce lots of draws. So e takes f4, bishop f4, and now knight a5. Well, the bishop goes back, and now knight to d5. And all of a sudden, there are the tactics. So we're threatening to take the bishop on f4, but also the knight on g5. And note, of course, that you couldn't have done it here because after knight d5, e takes d5, the knight on c6 is threatened as well. So the knight gets out of the way. Now knight to d5. But the drawback from black's standpoint is that white has a mate threat now, thanks to the bishop being on c2. Okay, h6 is forced. And now knight to d2. And here comes white. But wait a minute, you say, well, what about bishop takes f4? Well, on that, queen f5 is completely fine. So bishop takes d5, stops any knight f3 ideas, but white just plays knight e4. No problem. If bishop b4, and white has good compensation for the pawn. So bishop f4 is the main move. And now queen f5. So not queen takes d5, but just queen f5. Threatening knight f6 check, followed by queen h7 mate. And playing rook e8 doesn't help, because knight f6, and then queen h7, and then queen h8 is mate. So black plays g6. Okay, now knight f6 check. And here king h8 would be a blunder, because after queen takes f4, you would threaten queen takes h6 mate and knight takes d5. And if king h8, queen f4, you play g5, well then queen f5, and again mate on h7 is a threat. So black has to play king to g7 here, so that h6 is protected. So if queen f4, well, there's no mate, and also, in fact, more importantly, black has queen takes f6. So knight h5 check is forced. G takes h5, queen h7, and there's yet another speedy draw in the Zaitsev. So knight to g5 is a bit of a nuisance, but there are ways that black can keep the game going. Anyway, white is generally not so spineless and plays knight b to d2. All right, so now bishop f8, and here white has three moves, at least, that we'll talk about. a4, which is the main line, but also d5 and a3. These are both important moves too. So d5. Now this, as you may recall, is a very good reaction in the Chigorin when black plays bishop to b7. But the difference between that and here is that black still has the option of playing c6, undermining white's center. Of course, in the Chigorin, the pawn would already be on c5 by now. So knight to b8, knight f1, knight b to d7, and here white has tried two different knight moves. Knight to g3, kind of typical move, and also knight 3 to h2, preparing knight to g4. And this is in fact very logical against the idea that black has of playing c6. It'll come back to an idea we've seen both in the Rui and also way back in the Najdorf with bishop to e3, e5, and knight f3. So you'll see what I mean in a moment. First, though, knight to g3. So then knight to c5, bishop c2, c6, and now another very typical idea. We've seen this plan as well. b4, driving the knight back, swapping, and then playing bishop to b3, putting the bishop back on the nice diagonal. Here, the white would rather maybe have the knight back on e3. Anyway, black chooses between h6 most of the time to keep the knight out of g5, and knight to b6 with the idea of playing d5 as quickly as possible. All right. The alternative plan is maybe more interesting, knight 3 to h2, and we'll have a bit more to say about this one. So knight c5 and then c6 again, once again right back, b4, and the swap. But now instead of bishop to b3, white plays bishop to g5. And then after queen c7, we swap and play knight to g4. So this is, again, a very color by numbers kind of plan by white. Just trade off every black piece that can fight for the d5 square and hope to end up with either the strong light square bishop against black's relatively non-participatory bishop on f8, or, of course, the knight on d5 against the same bishop. So takes, and now the question is again, can white use this superior or potentially superior minor piece situation in time? Well, black has a couple of moves that are okay. One is bishop to e7, but here I think white has lots of decent options. Knight e3 or queen to d3, so knight e3, queen d3, protecting the e4 pawn in advance, queen f3, and bishop to b3. So all of these are quite okay. Oops, I just did something I did not mean to do. Uh-oh, let me go back. This is, just a second. If I don't fix this, then I'm going to be absolutely lost in my notes very soon, and that will be a disaster. Okay, there we go. So, yeah, I wanted to promote, sorry, this. Okay. All right, so that was bishop to e7. a5 is, I think, maybe the better move here. But white's done okay here, too. Knight e3, and now black has tried several moves. So a takes b4, just opening the file, of course. Rook e to b8, and queen to b7. And after queen to b7, okay, white generally plays knight e3. Or, sorry, white's already played knight e3. What I wanted to say was that after knight e3, white's score from here is about +2 and with a lot of draws. So it's maybe not a lot, but it's something, and this is a position that will at least let you out of a lot of theory. You can play this with more by your understanding, by your feel. So both bishop e7 and a5 are okay. The point of bishop to e7 is to perhaps play bishop to g5, especially when the knight is sitting on e3. So here, for instance, if knight e3, bishop g5, and then perhaps exchange. So, you know, white's got maybe a little something here. All right, so that's a little taste of that. A second move of importance is a3. And this has a couple of ideas. One, of course, is to try to keep the bishop on the a2, g8 diagonal. The second is to keep black's knight off of b4, which, as we'll see, is, well, it's quite a lovely knight. All right, so h6, just as against a4. And now white's got two normal moves here. Bishop to a2 and bishop to c2. Okay, if bishop a2, again, keeping the bishop on the diagonal, and waiting for black to commit one way or another. See, the thing with black, or black's idea here in this system, is to exert a lot of pressure against white's e4 pawn. So the knight's hitting it. After the typical e takes d4, the rook is hitting it. And, okay, for instance, in positions with a4, e takes d4, and then knight to b4, the bishop on b7 is joining in the hunt as well. So white is kind of waiting, hoping that black will move this knight from c6 someplace innocuous, and only then play something committal. All right, so knight to b8, threatening to take on d4 and then take the e-pawn. And this really is why bishop c2 is more common. Well, white can play queen to b3 here with a subtle idea. And it can also play d5 with a similar point that we've already seen, closing the diagonal, preventing black from pressuring the e4 pawn. But, of course, black will get some counterplay still with an inevitable c6. All right, so black has done pretty well there. Bishop c2 is more common. Just neutralizing the pressure and, again, using the a3 pawn to keep black's knight off of b4. So black will typically go Breyer here, knight b8, b4, knight b to d7. And in fact, we've reached a position from the Breyer. So I won't say very much about it, but I'll give a little bit. Bishop to b2, g6. And now white has tried a couple of moves most of the time. c4, which seems a bit old-fashioned. Black has done well. Takes, 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 knight d4, c6, now a4, takes, takes, and queen to b6. And the pressure against black's c and d pawns seems to be pretty manageable from black's standpoint. Of course, there's counter pressure against b4 and e4. So all in all, it looks like black should be okay. So queen to b1 instead is a typical idea. It's kind of a funny-looking move, but it does a number of things. It overprotects the e4 pawn, and it prepares to line up on the a2, g8 diagonal with queen a2 and bishop to b3. All right. Here, black sometimes plays rook to b8 just to create some possible tactical pressure vis-a-vis the queen on the b file, especially with c5 coming from black's point of view and maybe a4 or c4 from white's. Alternatively, there's bishop to g7, just continuing to develop. And now white generally doesn't go on with the long diagonal pressure, but instead, again, with the triple protection of the e-pawn, well, quadruple at the moment, but triple with the knight now leaving, plays knight to b3. So rook c8, knight a5. Okay, a4 is also possible, now that, especially now that black's rook has quit the a file. But knight a5, bishop a8, and now d5. Note, of course, again, that knight to b3 would allow ed and then knight takes e4, were it not for queen b1. Okay, so I'm going to go back here, d5, knight b6, a4, and white's results here have been pretty encouraging. So a3 is also a move that is worth considering. All right, but now let's jump into the great, big, gigantic theoretical palace with many, many rooms, that is a4. All right, h6 is the main move, but we have to take a quick look at queen at d7, which is a much quieter line. The idea, again, we've seen this before in our series, is to play knight to d8 and maybe knight e6, especially in case of knight to g5. So it's another way of dealing with threats to f7 besides playing h6. All right, white generally plays either d5 or first plays this double exchange and then plays d5. Here, black has tried, I think, every single knight retreat. It's gone to a7, a5, e7, d8. But knight to b8 is what we'll focus on, since this has been the main choice of Queen D7 specialist Predrag Nikolic, who's a very strong grandmaster who I think even hit 2,700 at one point. So quite a good player, and he's played this several times. Okay, knight f1, h6, knight 3 to h2, knight a6, bishop c2. And I don't recall, not all of Nikolic's games reached here, but I think at least one of them did. Here I would suggest the following. c6, knight g4, takes, c takes d5, e takes d5, and now maybe queen to b7, pressuring the d5 pawn. As far as I can tell with the engine, this is playable, but it's really risky. Definitely this is a caveat emptor situation. Knight e3, knight c5, and now g5. And white is whipping up a pretty scary attack very quickly. Again, it looks like black can survive, but enough about the following is pretty razor edge. So be careful. Queen h5, threatening mate, e4, killing the diagonal. Knight to g4, queen takes d5, and now rook e3 with the idea of rook h3. And black, I think, has to play like this. Rook e6, and now rook h6. If knight takes h6, of course, black recaptures, and I think he's okay there. Alternatively, there's queen takes h6, and then check. And black has surrendered the exchange, but he's got two pawns for it, and I think he's all right. So his pawn, his e4 pawn, might be a little bit loose. Maybe at some point he'll play f5, but then f3 may be a possible shot to exchange maybe for the f5 pawn and just open up a line for the rook. I think black is all right here, but I think this is okay for black. But somewhere before this point, maybe white can find something. All right, well, let's go back to here. So this was on AB, rook a8, and then d5. Again, white can also play d5 straight away, and it might be a little bit better. So knight e7, knight f1, knight g6. Again, this knight 3 to h2 idea to swap off the knight on f6. c6, knight g4, takes, and here h6. Okay, h6 is, it's not the most attractive move, but if white plays g5, that will really restrict black's kingside quite a lot. You'll continue with knight g3, put a piece on f5, maybe the queen goes to h5, and so on. All right, so here, anyway, white will still put a piece on f5, knight g3, bishop e7. This is a good move. Sometimes you'll play bishop to g5 to swap off your dark square bishop, but here you got to be a bit careful, maybe about the h-file too, and the health of the g-pawn. So knight f5, probably bishop f6 is better, and now rook e4. And with ideas like g5 in some positions, also rook to b4 sometimes, white's at least got some pressure here. So I'm not sure that I can really recommend queen to d7. Okay, so h6. So now we're entering the theoretical realm. The next batch of moves is pretty much automatic or close. Bishop c2, takes, knight b4, bishop b1, c5, d5, closing the threats against e4 and blocking the bishop on b7. And now black plays knight to d7. And here, rook a3. And now we're at a big fundamental juncture, where black has two very different ways of handling the position. So one way is to play f5 and just blow open the center, get the d5 pawn, and hope that that gigantic central mass will become relevant faster than white's kingside attack. Because you can see white's got to have both bishops pointing at black's kingside. There's the f5 pawn. At least one of the knights will join in the fun. The rook's going to swing across to g3. The queen will come into play through g4 or h5. And, well, it's going to be pretty terrifying for black if he's, not able to exchange some pieces and, again, make his central presence known. So that's one approach. The second way to go is with c4, followed by knight c5, and then dropping a knight on d3, hoping that this will plug up enough of white's pieces to keep the black king safe. Now, this variation became extremely prominent in the 1986 match between Kasparov and Karpov, and they played this a bunch of times in that match and in their subsequent matches too through 1990. And Kasparov definitely had the better of that argument. But theoretically speaking, I mean, the games were very sharp, and it was just that Kasparov, his attacks sooner or later tended to bear fruit. But they were fantastic games. I would certainly recommend looking at them. I mean, there's beautiful, incredibly tough fighting games by both sides. And, those were really, I think, some of the jewels of their matches, especially in the 86 match. All right, well, I didn't really say too much about the move since h6 in here, but, it's clear what's going on. I mean, black's got this queenside majority. It's kind of like a fantastic Benoni for the most part over there on the queen side. And white, of course, has this central majority and a lot of pieces ready to swing over to the king side. So we're going to see a lot of this now. All right, well, let's start with f5, which is a really radical move. Okay, white's got a bunch of moves here. E takes f5 is, I think, the most common move, just getting on with it. But he can try to hold on to the center for a while. So let's start with rook a to e3, bringing the rook across first. Here, knight f6, I think. I should say, I'm not going to give you every single variation, but I am giving you a lot of variations. And I'm trying to give you the main lines whenever possible. Again, a lot of this I've done my best to computer check, too. So I really hope that this is going to put you in good stead, whichever side of the equation you prefer to be on. So knight f6, knight h2, queen d7, e takes f5, rook e3, f e3, bishop takes d5, knight to g4. And now, a couple of possibilities. In the 1990 match between Kasparov and Karpov, and a bunch of other games too, black played bishop to e7, which, is as close to a common sense move as you could find here, protecting the knight so he doesn't have to take with the g pawn. So now e4, hitting the bishop and protecting the f5 pawn some more. Bishop f7, knight f3, rook d8, and it looks like black is all right here. So black seems to be okay in this position. The computer, by which I mean Houdini 2 point whatever it is at this moment, suggests knight takes g4, which looks insane. This is very inhuman. And then b takes the a4. Although I should say about this b takes a4 resource, we're going to see this quite a few times. This is not just some goofy materialistic pawn grab by the computer. In fact, this can prove useful in a number of variations. Opening the b file, preventing white from using the a file sometimes. And there's another idea behind it as well. So anyway, from here, for instance, knight e4, okay, threatening to win the queen, so king h8, bishop d2, rook e8, and now if knight c3, then bishop to b3. Sometimes the pawn on a4 is a useful anchor for this guy, and then the point of putting the bishop on b3 is to play bishop or knight to c2 to shut down that bishop on b1. And black is at least equal there. Alternatively, there's bishop to c3, and now, well, knight to c2, knight to a2. So it's kind of funny that black can use so profitably squares like a2 and c2, but in a way it's not surprising because, again, black has really made serious progress on the queen side in this opening. But anyway, it looks, at least the computer thinks that black is okay. I'm not sure I believe this. I would have to spend an awful lot more time analyzing this knight takes g4 variation before I would be willing to play it, even in a rapid game. So I would stick with bishop to e7, which seems to be fine and has survived the test of time so far. Well, and since it has, rook a to e3 is, I think, not the most dangerous move. Another very interesting move is g4, which looks really strange, but the point is, that, well, there are 2 points. If black continues with this plan of destroying white's center, plays f takes e4, and then bishop takes d5, well, now the g-pawn comes into play with g5, and this pawn is contributing to white's attack in a serious way. If he takes on h6, well, that's, of course, eliminating some defenders, and the g7 pawn's not going to be able to survive intact either. While if black were to exchange, then, well, the knight gets the g5 square, or the bishop does, the queen's ready to swing out to h5, and of course h5 is committal in its own way too. So I think black generally plays f takes g4, white recaptures, but now at least white has managed to keep the e4 d5 block intact, which keeps the bishop on b7 restricted. So it's a very interesting approach. Still another move is knight h2. Well, now we'll look at 2 moves, knight f6 and queen e7. On knight f6, then rook f3. So we find the rook has gone to e3, it'll go to g3 many, many times, and to f3 now as well. All right, here, if f takes e4, knight b to d5, black has won his pawn, but after knight to g4, I'm sure white is better, and I would be pretty scared to have black. And in fact, in practice, he's gotten pummeled. White scores more than 70% here. And with all 7 of his pieces, either on the king side or pointing at the king side, or maybe in the case of the queen, 1 move away from moving someplace dangerous, black's defensive task is a terrifying one. So instead of fe, rook e5 looks a little more encouraging. So now rook takes f5, rook f5, ef5, bishop d5, knight g4. Okay, and now here it doesn't look all that natural to play a move like bishop f7, but in fact this is the main move. On knight takes g4, white has done very well with h takes g4, although there haven't been very many high-level tests over the past decade or so. All right, so bishop f7, knight e4, knight takes g4, queen g4, d5, f6. All right. Now, white has scored better than 80% over the course of 30 games from here. So you might wonder, well, why am I even mentioning this variation with knight f6? Well, a couple of reasons. I mean, one is that, for instance, those of you with the small ECO, and maybe the big ECO as well, gives this as the main line. So, my recommendation would be to run screaming in the opposite direction, at least if you play the Zaitsev with black. But we're going to look at this very, very, very deeply. So there's a lot of theory on this, and here I'm definitely extending the theory a bit, at least as far as I know I am. Okay, so 2 moves from here. There's d takes e4, and there's h5. And I believe this is the h5, I think, is the ECO recommendation. Actually, I'm not positive at this point. But let's jump into both of these. Okay, so first of all, d takes e4. So the following is quite forcing. Fg, now bishop takes h6, threatening mate, so obviously queen f6. Now queen e4 threatens the rook in the corner and to check on h7. So what does black do? If bishop takes h6, well, this is not good enough for black. Materially, it's not so bad. It's 2 minor pieces for rook and 2 pawns, and often that can be pretty okay, but here with AB and then rook e4, it looks like black is just in big trouble. The threats to check on g4, so bishop f4, now g3, queen b2, rook f4 all the same, queen b1 check, king h2, obviously not to g2 because bishop d5 would win the queen. But here, I think black is losing. Again, materially he's fine, it's even, but his king is too exposed and he's going to lose something. So white's winning at this point. So back here, instead of bishop takes h6, knight to d5 is the move. Check here, bishop h7. And now 2 moves from this point as well. We'll come back to the other move. But first, king f7. And this was played in a Morozevich-Grishuk game. In fact, I think there are 3 games to go here, and we'll continue. So 3 games have gone to this point, and they were all drawn, including a excuse me, including a Morozevich-Grishuk clash from 2002. But Rook e4, which has not been played before, puts an end to black's hopes. White is simply winning, and I'll just continue my main variation here for a while. Queen f7, check, here, check, knight e7, and now rook e3, which is a very subtle point, but we'll see the idea of this in a bit. Well, the main line, or the idea is seen here. Let's say he just plays b takes a4. Well, now we check, king g8, and now rook to g3. So if the rook were on e4, it couldn't hop over the queen to get here, but now this is just winning. If knight g6, queen e4, with a double attack on g6 and a8. So knight g6, well, yeah, queen e4 wins. So going back to here, instead of b takes a4, black can try rook c8. Now a b, queen d7, check, check. Again, the rook goes to the g file. All right, now this is very complicated, but ultimately, with the help of a computer, it's a little tougher, just you versus the computer, but it's not very easy for black to play this position either. But objectively speaking, black is lost. It only takes you till move 48 to prove it with certainty, but nevertheless, it's a forced win. Now let's go back here. So we looked at king f7. Knight to e7 is a better defensive try, and this is going to prove much more significant in a minute here. So knight e7 takes, here, king f6, rook c7, bishop h7, and rook h7. And I would say normally white would be winning in such an endgame, but here I'm not 100% sure. But certainly it's white who's got the winning chances here. The reason it's not entirely clear is because black's queenside majority is not so bad, and his king is active. Well, stay tuned. You're going to see lots more of this ending with one very, very slight difference in a moment. So what we've been looking at now is d takes e4. All right, h5 is a small improvement that makes a very small but not trivial difference. All right, so from here, queen f4, and now d takes e4. fg, bishop g7, queen takes e4, knight e5, check, here, bishop h6, queen f6, check, here, bishop h7. Look familiar? It should. So we're back to Morozevich-Grishuk with one small difference. Black has a pawn on h5 here. All right, let's see if it makes a difference. If king f7, it makes no difference at all, because takes, and then the pawn disappears, and we've just made a straight transposition to the Morozevich-Grishuk game, which, as we saw, is a win for white. You only have to make another 13 moves here to prove it. All right. Instead, though, remember, from here, we tried knight to e7 in that last variation, and we should try it here too. And this time it makes a difference. Takes. Okay, if bishop f7, by the way, bishop e4, bishop f3, and I think white is just has very good winning chances. In fact, this occurred in an ICCF email game back in 2003 that white went on to win. So I'll very quickly scroll through this just so you get some idea of the general technical approach. Okay, well from here we don't have to go any further. Really, there's not even any good reason for black to have played this out. Well, I suppose what he's hoping for is that white forgets at some moment that bishop plus h-pawn against king with everything else gone would be a draw. So he had to be a little bit careful about that, but there's no way for white, or no way for black to force that, so white went on to win without too much work. So back here, instead of bishop f7, king f6, let's stick to what we were looking at before. Rook c7, takes, and takes. Now, here black's h-pawn makes a difference, and I think he can survive. And now he should not play king to g6. After rook c7 and then rook c5, black's king is shut in, his queenside is neutralized, and I think with just reasonably careful play, advancing the kingside majority, white should win the game. But going back to here, however, now things are much more interesting with king e5. And I actually spent a lot of time analyzing this first. Then I saw that there were some correspondence games with this, and then checked my analysis with those games. So let's dig in. This is really a fascinating endgame, by the way. I would say for any of you who are looking for a good analysis exercise, take this position and analyze the heck out of it. I mean, I think you'll really get quite a lot out of it. All right, so let's start with f4 check. So this is interesting, but I think black is able to hold. So first of all, king to d4 is interesting, just ignoring the pawn and getting on with the queenside play. But black can take rook h5, rook c8, and now, okay, let's say rook h6. Here, black should play king to e3. So again, very dynamic play. So not keeping his king over there, not worrying about the fate of the a-pawn. In a rook ending, activity is almost everything. And here, black should just disregard the a-pawn and go for his counterplay. Rook a6, b4, and it's white, in fact, who really needs to be afraid here. Maybe he can still hold this. Well, he probably can still hold this, but if anyone's worse here, it's white. This is not trivial any longer for him. So instead of that, a takes b5 is a better move. ab, king f2, and now white has what small chances there are, but really black should hold such an ending without too much difficulty. So again, just with white, don't play rook takes h6. All right, instead of f4, rook h5 is the crucial move. And now king to d4. Black's counterplay is very dangerous, but again, after spending quite a lot of time on this, at least 30 minutes to an hour, I think it's a draw. All right, I'm not as certain as I was initially, though. Initially, I thought this should just be a relatively easy draw. Now I'm not 100% sure, but I still believe that it is. Okay, from here, f3, and now there was a correspondence game where black played b takes a4. And this, I think, is the kind of move that results from excessive faith in one's chess engine. Now, I have to say, I mean, the player with black who did this is a very strong player. His correspondence rating was 26-12. So this guy is no idiot. But still, I really believe that this is the kind of thing you play, again, when you've got too much faith in the engine. And even my engine likes it for a fairly long time. And then all of a sudden, when it's too late, it starts to realize that white's majority is better. So check here, rook a4, king c2, g4, king b2, h4. And it's still happy, the engine, at least mine is, on a decent computer. Pretty good quad core, but again, it's still blissfully unaware here. I think even here it's still pretty happy. It's still giving 3 zeros. Okay, well now from here, the game Nivelt against Fry Beckman went like this: c3, g5, rook h8, h6, c2, king f2, a5, rook g1, rook d8, okay, threatening rook d1, so just king e2. And now it realizes that black is just busted. And you can just turn on your engines here, work it out yourself, but white does indeed win. Sooner or later he'll have to give up the rook, but his pawns are going to be faster. So I went back a little bit. I tried to save this one time from here with the immediate c3, but this loses too. g5, let's say rook h8, h6, c2, king f2, a5. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I just copied the game. Yeah, king to b2 is what I mean. Rook e1, and now rook h8. Trying to stop the pawns as quickly as possible. White activates the rook. And, well, the problem is, of course, that white will sacrifice and wins by 1 tempo, which is good enough. So here he's winning. Again, consult your engines if you don't believe it, but it shouldn't be too tough to prove it manually. You just g5, g6, king g5, h6, etc. Or g5, g6, g7. Okay, so, yeah, I didn't believe any of this. I mean, I thought it would be a draw, too, but b takes a4 is just not the move that struck me as the way to go. So, of course, b4. Play like a human being. All right, so now king f2, c4, and we'll look at two options for white at this point. So bringing the king over to e2, or just getting on with it and playing g4. So if king e2, rook e8, king d1, and now the king is around to protect, but the king can often end up being a target in such positions. So this may be defending in a boxing match with your face. So c3, okay, let's say b3, c2 check. So another nice move. Giving up on his hopes of, well, for the moment, giving up on his hopes of using or getting counterplay with his pawns on the queen side, but activating the rook, breaking up the white kingside mass, and drawing. In fact, here, oops, sorry, if king to c1, then after king c3, black might be winning at this point. So the threat's mate. He's going to take on g2. He's going to take on b3, and black's king's more active. White may also lose the a4 pawn. This is bad. So king to d1 is correct. Rook g2, rook a5, making sure to at least get rid of the a6 pawn. King c3, rook a6, king b3, rook b6, king a4, and of course, white has no winning chances here whatsoever. One or the other of his kingside pawns will drop. Black's b pawn is certainly at least as dangerous as any of white's kingside pawns, so it's going to be a draw. Okay, so let's go back to here. Sorry, here. Instead of king e2, which we saw was not really an effective plan, let's try just pushing the pawns. g4, okay, now b3, rook h7, now king to d3 to play king c2, so rook c7. Here, a5 is turns out to be pretty good. And the point of this, it might look like just some kind of really tempo-wasting idea, but the point is that after g5, king c2, rook c4, king b2, the white rook can't go to b4. So black is going to get that tempo back, and of course, you know, it's useful to have the pawn, the a pawn, one square closer to promotion. So now, for instance, if king g3, then king a3, rook c1, and king a4, and black is probably winning at this point. So white should play h4. Instead, passed pawns must be pushed. King a3, rook c1, b2, rook b1, king a2, rook e1, rook e8, and we've got a draw here in this way. So the point is, you might say, well, why not just play rook to g1? Well, the idea is that then black can play rook c8, threatening rook c1, and white can't pin the pawn to the king with rook e2, for instance. So anyway, this I think is a draw. Maybe I've missed something, but it seems to me that black is surviving here. Okay, well, all of that was quite a lot to say about this move, knight h2, knight f6. So again, we got there like this, and then from here we embarked on that endgame. But after knight h2, black has another move, queen e7, and this is probably better and definitely safer, no question about that. So two variations from here. If rook a to e3, f4, rook 3 to e2, and now black has at least three decent moves. So queen f7 is the engine's initial suggestion. Knight to e5 is a very natural human move, blockading the e5 square, and of course if white can't play e5, then he can't put a knight on e4, his rooks don't do anything on the e file, and the bishop on b1 is going to sleep. So that's a very attractive move to make. And then there's also c4, which is the move that I think has been chosen most commonly in actual praxis, including by Ivanchuk, I forget against who, maybe Anand, I'm not positive, in the Turin Olympiad back in 2006. I guess we can take a quick check here. Let's see. Who did Ivanchuk play this against? Where, oh, where is this? Okay, maybe I'm confused, or maybe it was, oh no, sorry, knight to e5 is what Ivanchuk chose. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, against Anand. But you can see, boy, c4 has been played many, many, many times, 28 games. So it's a popular move, but like I said, knight e5 is certainly a very sensible try. All right, so plenty to examine further there. Instead of looking at c4 or any of these moves in further depth, though, we will also look here at knight d to f1. And this has been the usual choice amongst correspondence players, although black has done quite well. 10 draws, just 1 loss. So, and the loss was, I think, quite a long time ago. So from here, knight takes d5, taking advantage of the pin, so the rook on e1 is loose. So white plays knight g3, continuing its journey and hoping to jump into f5. So fe4, bishop e4, king h8. So now bishop takes d5 isn't with check, so there's queen takes e1. Rook e2, protecting the rook. Queen f7, defending the knight. Rook f3, queen g8, knight g4. We're still well within theory, by the way, even though we're on move 24 here. And now Two games, both featuring a very strong correspondence player named Voss. Not sure what his first name is, but starts with an M. Maybe it's a her, for all I know. Anyway, Voss is a high 2600 in correspondence chess. Once played B takes A4, or actually, yeah, B takes A4 is what Voss played against Rakin in a 2006 email game. And this seems to be fine, so we'll very quickly cursor through this just so you see, get a little taste of how the play went. So black is able to maintain good central control, and in that way neutralize white's kingside ambitions. So again, white's got a little pull here, but black managed to hold without any really huge trouble, and they agree to a draw here. Okay, going back, instead of B takes A4, Rook A to B8 was played against Voss by Langeveld in 2009 in another email game. And so that one went AB, AB, B3, aiming to put the bishop on the long diagonal, which is another important attacking concept for white. So sometimes white hits H6 and even sacks a bishop there, but the long diagonal is another potential gravy train for the attacker. So knight E5, trying to shut it down, takes, knight F5, knight B4, so aiming to swap off this, well, at least one of the dangerous bishops, takes, bishop B2, knight C6. So you can see, I mean, white's attacking prospects are always very, very dangerous, but black is showing that there really are excellent resources. So he traded off one of the bishops, the other one has been neutralized, and the knight's ready to maybe jump into D4 at some point too. So knight H4, queen E6, clearing G8 for the king, queen C2, king G8, knight G6, bishop to D6, protecting the E5 pawn some more, knight F4, queen D7, queen E4, bishop F8, knight G6, rook back, takes, and black had been up a pawn all this time, so this just reestablished material equality. And I suppose there's something like, well, I'm not sure. It looks like bishop to D6 ideas are certainly present. So the players agreed to a draw at this point. You can see, you know, white certainly had pressure, but for a pawn, and black was able to hold. Okay, so that was queen to E7 here, and that was knight H2. So finally, there's E takes F5. So I don't think we covered this one yet. Did we cover this? Yeah, we did not cover this yet. So E takes F5. So this one is my main line, and it's, or I don't know if it's my main line, but it's we can maybe focus on this a little bit because Bolligan in his 3-disc series on the Ruy Lopez for ChessBase, which is a good series, but I've certainly found a pretty fair number of improvements here. But anyway, it is very good. So those of you who are devoted to the Ruy, in addition, of course, to my 33 parts, which will be 34 parts after next week, you know, I think I've done some pretty good stuff, but certainly his is very good and, you know, worth your time if you're, again, a devoted Ruy Lopez advocate. So anyway, he gives E takes F5. And now, 2 moves for black. Knight F6 and bishop takes D5. Knight F6 is the most common move, but I don't think it's better. I think bishop takes D5 is the better choice. So here, after AB, knight E4, I think white stands slightly better. Black has tried a bunch of moves here. He's tried rook takes A3 followed by knight B takes D5. So he's tried this. He's tried the immediate knight B takes D5. He's tried knight F takes D5. And all of these, as far as I can tell, favor white. And in fact, white's advantage tends to grow. Well, it doesn't grow. I mean, if an advantage is decisive, it's always decisive. You know, you can't make it more decisive. But you know, the engine's realization of white's advantage becomes increasingly evident as you go further in. But so that's what I mean when I say that white's advantage grows. Of course, it can't grow if black is playing perfectly. All right, so the main line we'll look at here is bishop takes D5 at this moment. Here, rook takes A8, but now Bolligan gives bishop A8, knight F6, G-F6, and then rook E6. And white is clearly better here. But here I think we have an easy improvement. Of course, you should play queen takes A8. There doesn't seem to be any drawback to it, and it has the advantage that it keeps the white rook off of e6. So white is still probably a little bit better, but this is not catastrophic for black. Nevertheless, I would say instead of knight to f6, that black should play bishop takes d5. All right, here knight e4 is sometimes seen, but I think black is just fine and has done well after knight f6 and this swap. So this, I think, is no big deal. The better move is rook e8. So queen e8. Here, rook e3 is playable. In fact, there are a lot of moves that both sides can try. Knight h4, though, is a pretty typical idea. It allows the rook to swing over to g3, and the knight's going to go into g6. Okay, b takes a4. And the idea of this goofy move is to play bishop to b3, perhaps. And, of course, to open the b file for the rook. So knight g6. And here, okay, Boligan gives queen f7, rook takes a4, rook e8, rook a3, knight f6, and knight f1. And white has an edge, maybe not a huge one, but certainly a promising position. The kingside buildup is going to be very easy, and black will have to be quite careful. But I think there are improvements. For instance, here, knight f6. Okay, so rook a4, queen c6, hitting g2, rook a3, and probably taking on g2 is asking a bit much. I mean, rook g3 and then knight f8, and it's precarious. So rook e8, knight f3, bishop e4, trying to neutralize the bishop, bishop d2, d5, and now, for instance, knight f to e5, queen b5, takes, rook e3, king h7, takes, g4, rook c8, and queen c5. Not all forced, so I have to, warn you guys. Both sides can vary on plenty of occasions in that sequence, but nevertheless, it's a reasonably plausible line. And in general, I think white has a very small edge. I mean, black is trying to neutralize it, is trying to prove equality, and maybe still hasn't quite done it. But I think black should hold. I think black can play this in correspondence chess for sure, and shouldn't lose. But both sides certainly have trumps here, so I wouldn't necessarily fear to play this position with black. Nevertheless, f5 is quite risky, and c4, the classic move, is, I think, the more popular choice still nowadays when the top guys play. All right, so let's dive into this one. This is what happened, by the way, in most of the Kasparov-Karpov games. Karpov did play f5 at least a couple of times, I think, but c4 was the old faithful, and definitely the starring move back in the '86 match. All right. Now from here, white chooses between knight to d4 and a takes b5, and there are subtle differences, but they're very significant between the two. So there's knight to d4 right away, or ab, and then knight to d4. So let's quickly see what that difference is. It won't be quick seeing the theory, but seeing what the difference is will be reasonably quick. So if knight to d4 right away, this used to be a pretty major move. It's still not a trivial move, but it's definitely in an increasingly distant second place to AB. And the reason is this. Well, what knight to d4 does is it prevents black from swapping off the rook before it swings across. So on ab5, ab, knight to d4, black can play rook takes a3 here. And then, of course, the rook doesn't go over to g3. On the other hand, on knight to d4, queen f6, white can't play knight takes b5 here. So that's the advantage of playing ab first. Then on queen f6, you would have knight takes b5. You grab the pawn, the knight threatens to go into c7, and the rook still can swing across to f3 or g3 or wherever. So from here, white plays knight 2 to f3, closing the third rank. So now, knight c5, and here we'll look quickly at two variations or two tries by white. But white hasn't done very well here at all. Black has done really well. In fact, the most recent high-level games have all been won by black. All right, so just to look at two of them, both feature on, one on each side. So rook e to e3 is what he played against Kazimzhanov back in Bastia in 2006. So then knight b to d3. And again, dropping a knight on this square is really the key idea with c4. So black gives up this pawn, but in fact he just regains it. And here I would recommend knight takes e4 instead of rook e4 as played by Kasimdzhanov. After rook e4, knight c4, his idea was to play knight f2, but maybe white is slightly better after king takes f2. Black is okay, but I think white is a little bit better. In the game, though, Anand played queen to e2, and this was a big mistake. Knight takes h3 check, g takes h3, and then queen to g6 check. The point being that after king f2, he plays rook e3, and after bishop e3, queen takes b1. So that was the idea. Black is up a pawn, white's compensation is insufficient, and although the play wasn't perfect from here on out, Kasimdzhanov went on to win in another 14 moves. So back to knight c5. The alternative, which was played by Shirov against Anand in Moscow in 2007, was a takes b5. So again, we have this sequence, but here black is unable to regain the pawn immediately. All right, so bishop to a6, protecting the c4 pawn, again preparing sooner or later to play a knight to d3, and also the bishop going to a6 clears the b file for the rook. It's a very similar setup was chosen by Karpov against Kasparov, again in the 86 match. Game 16 was really the high point of the battle in that variation. So rook e3, rook to b8, and here black is equal. His compensation is fully sufficient. Shirov played knight to d4, which is again a very typical move, clearing the path for the rook to go to g3, and for the queen to come out as well at some point, and also the knight would like to go to f5. But after knight b to d3, bishop d3, knight d3, black was better, and after this exchange sacrifice, black was in fact much better. Perhaps what Shirov overlooked or underestimated was rook takes b2 here. And after bishop b2, queen b2, the problem is, well, the d pawn. I mean, it's just very, very strong. Material is equal, but white's knight on a3 is very bad. It has to go back to b1. And then after g6, black's bishop will come into the game. And again, the black d pawn is just so strong that black is winning here, and indeed went on to win. So knight to d4, there's more to it than what we just looked at, but it really does seem that with queen f6 and then knight c5, he's doing well. So ab is the crucial move. So ab, knight d4, and now queen f6 just makes no sense. Simply knight takes b5, and everything is great for white. Just up a pawn for nothing. All right. So what we have to look at then are queen to b6 and rook takes a3. And queen to b6 is much more common, though they're both very, very well-known moves. I mean, it's not like rook takes a3 is a minor line. It's just that queen to b6 has been more popular. And in a way, understandably so. By trading, black wants to put a knight on d3, but if you play rook a3 first and then play knight to d3, white can take it. I mean, that's okay for black, but black would love to put a knight on c5 first, and then play, keep a knight on d3, not just take back with the pawn. So this build-up with queen b6 and knight c5 is really attractive. The problem is, we'll see the problem. Anyway, let's have a look. So let's start with rook takes a3. So takes, knight to d3. Now, what black has gained is that white doesn't have that rook that's going to come swinging across to g3, which is extremely dangerous. Again, look at those Kasparov-Karpov games if you want to have evidence of that. And preferably annotated versions, because Kasparov in particular has found just so many beautiful lines in his analysis that it's really, really a delight to look at those games. Anyway, from here, I should say, the other thing, though, is that the second rook can sometimes come up and across, but really white needs to take. So takes, and now, some options. If knight takes b5, then I think with knight to c5 or queen to a5, black has very good compensation. He's down a pawn, but the a3 pawn is kind of weak. The d3 pawn is a genuine asset. Black will have some counterplay against the e4 pawn. The knight goes to c5. And it seems like black should be okay here. All right, instead, there's rook to e3. So forget the b5 pawn. That's not going to hurt anybody anytime soon. let's just get on with the attack as fast as possible. So knight c5, protecting the d3 pawn. It's a crucial asset. Bishop to b2, and now queen a5. Okay, here white has tried a whole slew of moves. There's knight f5, there's rook g3, there's queen c1, and we'll look at a fourth move in a moment. So all of these have been tried. Knight f5 and queen c1 have scored pretty well. Rook g3 has scored relatively poorly, but there haven't been so many games with any move, one move in particular, to really be sure. And the engine seems to think that black is okay in all of these cases, but you do have to kind of push the engine along because white's threats aren't really there yet, but they're not that many moves away either. Anyway, I'm going to focus here on h4 because again, this is Boligan's suggestion, and it was tried in a couple of fairly high-level games. So Stelvachen against Morozevich in 2011, and in 2009 by Efemenko against Gashimov. So he considers both. Again, bishop c8 was played by Morozevich. Knight a4 was played by Gashimov. Or no, I'm sorry, it was the other way around. Yeah, Efemenko played knight a4 against Gashimov. But Houdini says b4. And let's try this. I think it's a very logical move. I mean, sometimes the engine suggests something, and it seems, kind of a bit crazy and not to the point. But this does look to the point. I mean, knight a4 makes sense as well. It's hitting the bishop. And he wants to maybe put the knight on c3 and close that diagonal, and bishop c8 is aimed against knight f5. But b4 is also very sensible, too. Eliminating a weakness, creating more mobility for his pieces on the queen side where he is stronger, and he's harassing the bishop, too, after a, b, queen, b4. All right, so let's investigate some of white's possibilities. And I think ultimately black is going to be okay, and so maybe one of those alternatives to h4 should be considered. Okay, well, let's look at two moves, bishop to a1 and queen c1. So if bishop a1, then rook a8. So again, we keep an eye on this bishop, and that's going to keep the white queen honest. Well, also the fact that the knight on d2 is loose. So you can see that black's queen is really pretty good on b4. So knight 4 to f3. Well, that opens the diagonal, and it protects the knight on d2, but it's closing shop for the rook on e3. It can't go to g3, and it's blocking the queen on d1. So it's definitely got its pluses from black's point of view. Okay, rook a2, bishop d4, bishop c8, hoping to go to g4, maybe swap off the knight there. So queen f1 gets out of the way and hits the d3 pawn. So the threat's now to play bishop c5 and rook takes d3. So here, well, let me see. Why not bishop takes c5 and rook d3 here? Might be an interesting question. Not sure that it's bad. Certainly black has a lot of activity there, but, well, okay, bishop c5, queen c5, rook d3, bishop g4 is a bit clumsy because the knight from f3, it can't move because of the pin. The knight from d2 can't move because f2 is hanging. So bishop takes f3 becomes a threat there, perhaps, or at least it's getting threatening. So that may have something to do with this. So queen f1 sidesteps the pin in advance. So, and threatens to take with the queen on d3. So bishop a6, queen d1. Of course, black could just repeat with bishop c8, but he can also play g6, e5, bishop g7, queen c1, king h7. And black is in decent shape here. I mean, the d3 pawn is a genuine asset. Black's got the bishop pair. Of course, white has a nice little bunch in the center, but black's rook is also very active. So on balance, it looks like the pressure is on white to prove that he's equal even, really, at this point. So I think bishop to a1 is not all that terrifying for black. Another move is, oh, I'm sorry, I continued that line. So after king h7, just to give a continuation here, rook e1. So I'll go a little bit quickly, because again, there are alternatives everywhere, but just to show, again, some possibilities. Here, if rook to e3, then bishop takes d5 is clearly better for white, or for black, excuse me. So it's got very strong bishops and two pawns for the exchange. All right, if rook to b8, knight to d7, takes, queen c6. And here material is even, but again, I would say that white is pretty close to equality, but I still think that if there's an edge here, it's black's. All right, so that gives some idea. Okay, back here, queen c1 is the other choice. Now knight a4, just as in the Efemenko-Gashimov game, or I should say again, Gashimov-Efemenko. Bishop a1, rook c8, queen d1, and now knight to c5, going back to protect the pawn. Knight 4 to b3, queen a4 pinning, rook e1, rook a8. And again, if anyone's better here, it should be black. White's bishop on a1 is very nice, but g7 is well protected. The bishop is, it's by itself. It doesn't have anybody really helping with the attack. And black is pretty active, and the pawn on d3 is good. So I don't know that white is really in danger, but I think black is at least doing fine here. All right, so it's very complicated, but I still think that rook takes a3 is a good way for black to handle this. All right, so queen of b6 is the main line, and it's unbelievably sharp. So knight f5, knight e5, rook g3, g6, knight f3, knight e to d3. Okay, so this has occurred in many games. And now the main move here, which we'll look at, note that white is threatened by queen takes f2, or maybe even knight f2, as well as knight takes e1. So white's main move here is bishop to e3. And it's the best move, I think. But queen to d2 was tried and successful in the spectacular 2005 game between Anand and Adams from the San Luis World Championship. So the FIDE World Championship in San Luis. So here, Adams played bishop takes d5, and this just loses the game. Knight h6 check, bishop h6, queen h6, queen f2, king h2, knight e1, and now knight h4. All of this had been prepared by Anand years ago. I think he had prepared this for his candidates matches with Kamsky back in '94. And he only got the chance to use it 10 or 11 years later. Anyway, black is dead lost here. So when knight e to d3, knight takes g6, queen g3, king g3, fg6, queen g6 check, queen f6, and bishop to h6, and Adams resigned. So I know I went through this very quickly. Normally I'd go through this much more carefully and slowly. I've done a show on this somewhere. I don't know if it was for you guys or if it was Chess Base or where, but it's a fantastic game. I mean, definitely a beautiful game worth looking at very, very slowly and savoring it. But for our purposes, this is enough to show, because the bottom line is that bishop takes d5 just loses the game. Instead of that, black should play knight takes e1. And now, just to give the main line, knight e1, rook a1, knight h6 check, takes, and I'm not sure if rook takes b1 can be played. The engine likes it at first, but maybe it's one of these things where if you push a couple more moves, it'll change its mind. But in any case, it doesn't matter, because what does draw for sure, and has been played as a drawing variation many times now, is knight takes d5. Okay, white can play rook g6 right away, which we'll look at, or he could play e5 first, hoping to play bishop takes g6, so black takes, and then rook g6, and this will be a draw. So let's look at the immediate version. So rook g6, fg, queen g6, king f8 protecting the rook. Bishop h6 is bad, just king e7, and the king might even scurry off to safety and win. So queen f5 check, and here black has to be accurate. So the best move, maybe the only move, is king to g7. Now, white can play queen g4, well, queen g4 or queen g5. If queen g5, you play king f8. This is, I think, the most accurate way to handle it. And on queen f5, go back to g7. So don't let the bishop jump back into the game with tempo. So this is a draw. So queen to d2 is a very, very exciting variation, very dangerous, but if black knows what he's doing, it's just, the point is going to be split. So bishop to e3 is the winning try here. And now queen d8, and of course we're still well within theory. There are 80 games in the database, and I'm sure there are many more games that have been played elsewhere that aren't in the database from this position. So there are two main moves here, both captures on h6, and again there's Bolligan, who suggests bishop takes d3, which is in fact a very interesting try. So I think that's quite dangerous, and I hope I've improved on black's play over what he gives, because if not, maybe black is in some trouble. All right, well let's look at knight takes h6 first. So on knight h6 check, you take, and then, okay, not knight e1 because of knight takes e1. And white's doing quite well here. So I would suggest queen f6. All right, bishop takes d3, knight d3. Now we will take, so rook e2, which also gives a little bit of protection to the b2 pawn. Okay, here black has two moves that are both fully adequate for a draw. So one is knight takes b2, and this might even be the safer of the two. Queen d4, takes, knight d3. The rook was attacking that knight, so gets back to safety. Knight takes b5, bishop takes d5. So it's all captures here all the time. If knight c7, of course, rook a1 check. So knight takes d6, rook e6. And this has been played a bunch of times. Black is 100% okay here. Nothing to fear at all for black. Okay, so let's go back to here. The other way to go is with b4. Sometimes white plays queen to c2. If he does, you play bishop a6, defending your pawn, and you're fine with black. So bishop to g5, queen g7, bishop e3, heading for d4, at least in some cases. But white plays rook takes e4. Now, what was the point of bishop g5, queen g7? Why did white bother with that? The answer is that now he has bishop h6. Whereas if the queen was on f6 and he was playing bishop to g5, black would have queen f5. So that's the big point. Okay, so here black can choose between knight takes b2, which is equal, or taking on h6, and then taking on d5. And after rook to d4, of course, we're still in theory. There are, I think, 4 games from this position. 2 saw queen h5, and they were both drawn, and also just dead equal. And bishop takes f3 is also completely equal. I forget what the fourth move was. That one wasn't maybe quite as good, but I think that game ended in a draw as well. Well, we can look. Let's see. May not show it yet. I think we're too many moves in. But anyway, there was a 4th game from that point as well. Okay, now let's see. Yeah, let's look at Boligan's move. So we'll go back to here and look at bishop takes d3, knight d3, and now knight takes h6 check. All right, so there's some small differences here. So takes, and now, okay, he gives knight e1, queen e1, queen f6, and this has been played before, but Boligan finds a really nice idea here. I mean, this is seriously strong, and at this point, black is in real trouble. So the good move here, his big improvement, is bishop to d2. And after this, I think black has some real worries. So his line continues bishop c8, knight g5, queen e7, bishop c3, b4, bishop d4, f6, knight e6, king h7, protecting the pawn, rook f3, hitting the f-pawn, bishop takes f6, queen b7, de and rook e6, and then rook f4. And white has ideas like rook h4 check, obviously, or even, well, rook h4, rook h8, and then rook h7 picks up the queen. Or if black does something to take care of that, there's also ideas like f3 and then the queen coming to h4. So it's very dangerous, and Boligan stops here. But I think black may not be in too bad a shape here after rook f6 and then queen e7. So rook f4, queen e5, queen c1, c3, takes. And this ending is not completely clear. I mean, white's up a pawn, and black's king is, it's not as safe as white's king, but that c3 pawn is pretty darn good. So this is not 100% clear by any means. And the engine thinks it's only maybe slightly better for white. Okay, you have to be careful because, again, black's king is so chronically weak that it may not be so simple. But still, this is, black has counterplay. However, I think Boligan's idea is completely right. But here, instead of the very obvious and very natural bishop to c3, it looks like queen to e3 is even better. The engine really does not like black's position at all at this point. So because of queen e3, I think black should avoid all of this. So where do we improve? I think the answer is here. So let's go back to the beginning of this. It was bishop takes d3, knight h6, takes. Instead of knight takes e1, have faith in the octopus, the knight on d3. Play queen f6 instead. So this, I think, is much better. The knight is great on d3. The b2 pawn is going to hang. It's going to drop. And, the knight is, again, just doing such good work Who cares about the rook for the moment? All right, so rook e2, and now b4. And there's a very good fight in prospect here. I like black's chances. So I'm not saying black is better, but I'm not sure that he's worse either. And, certainly this is no refutation by white just yet. I mean, black is very much in the game. Lots of good pieces. Okay, he's got to be careful too. I mean, white certainly has his trumps on the king side, but I think everything is to play for here. So let's go back to here. So we looked at knight takes h6. We saw that that one was just nothing. Black is drawing all over the place there at will. Bishop takes d3, followed by knight h6 is much more interesting. But again, I think with my improvement, perhaps black is okay there. Remains to be seen. Finally, bishop takes h6. So this is, I think, the main move, the most common move here. And let's see how this one works out. So takes, again, queen f6, queen d2, and now knight takes e1. And this position has arisen plenty of times too. Let's see. Let's do a quick look here just so you can see. Okay, 10 games. So we're finally getting down to lesser theory, but still. Again, this Voss guy, we've mentioned him before. As a correspondence player, a very strong one. Cutronius Bolligan, kind of funny to see him on the black side. Holleyman, of course, a great player, former FIDE world champion in the mix too. And Cutronius Schlosser, which we'll look at in some detail. All right, so here, again, everybody played bishop takes f8 except for Cutronius with knight h2, which seems to be a mistake. Now, Bolligan played rook takes e4 and did eventually win the game, but it looks like the greedy knight e to d3 is even better. For instance, knight g4, queen b2, queen g5, and now queen c1 checks. So you just return a piece, but remember, we won a rook earlier, so here, after knight takes d5, which covers the f6 square, black is up the exchange and a pawn. All right, white certainly has compensation, but black should be winning here in the long run. So, indeed, Cutronius himself went on to vary. Actually, let me check that one more time for the dates. So, yeah, Cutronius Bolligan is 2007, and you can see, well, actually, the Schlosser game was from the same year, so I'm not sure which of these games is earlier or later than the other. All right, anyway, bishop takes f8 is the main move. Knight f3 check, rook f3. Here, black has also played, in addition to g takes f5, it's also played king takes f8. I'm not sure that this is as reliable. So knight h6, queen g7, takes. And again, this is probably drawn. In some ways, this is similar to something we're going to see later on anyway. I don't think it transposes. I hope it doesn't. If it does, that would be kind of embarrassing to prefer the one to the other. So, yeah, so this is slightly different than what we have here. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I think I'll retract the less reliable comment. Maybe less reliable. All right. Anyway, back to what I'm going to call the main line, which has been certainly the first choice by most of these guys, including, I think, again, good old Voss. So, if Voss is playing g takes f5 in a recent high-level correspondence game, and Holleyman too, I think we should consider that the main move. So, g takes f5, rook f5, and now queen g6. So it looks like a bit of a crazy move, but if you don't take it, then queen h6 and rook g5 is just going to kill you. So you got to do it. Queen d8's out of the question. All right, so rook g5, takes, king f8, queen h6 check. And now you got to be a little careful. Okay, don't play king to e7, trying to run away, because after e5 you're lost. The threat is queen takes d6 mate, and after you take d6 check, sooner or later your king goes to d7, then bishop to f5 check. Okay, king d8, queen f6 check. Black is completely lost here. It's just dead. So king to g8 is required, and now queen takes d6. E5, you can always play knight to d3 if there's nothing better, so you're not going to get mated here. So queen takes d6, rook a1, queen b4, rook b1 check, king h2, rook e4, queen b5, c3, queen b7. So all of this has been played too. This is Cutronius against Schlosser, drawn in 77 moves. And here Schlosser played c takes b2, which favors white, although, you know, it's not terrible, and again, he was able to draw. But I think the right way to play is king to g7. So you get out of the way of the checks. You get your king off of the back rank. So now d6, and now c2. So we give up the rook, but we're going to queen. So queen takes, c1 queen, and now all of a sudden we have to worry about white's pawn. So d7. Okay, black should play like this. Queen check, rook to d1, queen f5. So the threat now is to play queen g5 check and then queen, or to go the other way around. So f6, and now queen e4. But now white's queen is not on as good a square, so black can play rook to d2, hitting the f pawn. So this is all very intricate. d8 queen, queen takes f2 check, king h2. That's why you got to do it this way. You can't play queen e7 first from here, because then when you queen, then black can take on g2 as well. So queen, right, I mean here you've got the g2 square covered. So takes, check here, and then check, check. So we take with check. And here we have a queen ending that black should hold. So here we are on move 48. That's all you got to know. Just know 48 moves, and you can reach a slightly inferior but drawn queen and pawn ending. Well, it's a lot to know. You can see this is, again, a very, very complicated and rich system. And, you know, the danger is all blacks, really. I mean, they're, you know, in theory, of course, black's many trumps. I mean, you see, you know, you put these gorgeous knights, you know, on c5 and b4. One's going to go to d3. The queen goes to b6 or f6. I mean, it all looks really exciting and dramatic. But once you get into these lines, it's always white who's got the white who's always pressing. So if white goes wrong, then yeah, black's got a lot of great things going for him. But if white's well prepared, black is living on the razor's edge to save the game. I think he can. I think black is all right. But you got to know an awful lot just to get to positions like this where you're having to kind of work hard for the draw. All right, so with that, we are done with the Zaitsev. The Breyer, while not less, not I would say less rich, is definitely less tactical and much easier to manage by understanding some ideas. Still, you know, this is it's kind of fun. It's kind of exciting to play opening variations like this one. So I hope some of you will try the Zaitsev, but you know, just be well prepared if you do. All right, so that's going to do it. We are done with this. We've only got one Ruy Lopez show to go, and then that'll be it for the series. So I'm looking forward to it. Probably a lot of you are too. But I hope that, you know, putting in work like this for you guys for your benefit is something that you appreciate and can enjoy and use. So you know, if you have some success stories in this, please let me know. I would love to hear about them. Meanwhile, I'm going to close, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.